parshas korach is going to be somewhat of an atypical shir, in that it, in a certain sense, it's almost more history than halacha, or it's a combination of history and halacha. This shir is about the battle that the Chassam Sofer, Sefer Tzaddik L'Rocha, waged against the Reform movement. You have to understand the context of when the Chassam Sofer lived. The Chassam Sofer lived from the latter part of the 1700s, and he was nifter in 1839. I'm not a historian, and I'm not equipped to make broad historical statements, but one has to wonder that the French Revolution, which occurred in 1789 and brought a era of liberty and free thinking to the world, had an effect on the Jewish world as well. It certainly did, but even this particular prat, and that is that one can make an argument that perhaps those seeds spawned the seeds for the Reform movement. So the Chassam Sofer writes in a tshuva, from the time that this plague began plaguing us, Chadoshim Mikar of Bo, Lohitzias Hayoshan Hanhogas Hakedish Bnei Hachodesh Hashechid Shumidaitam, that they got rid of the old, and its place they brought in, quote, the new, which they formulated. So the Chassam Sofer writes, Amadati Lilcha Milchamas Hashem. I took upon it myself to fight the Milchamas Hashem, which means in spite of the fact that the Chassam Sofer, in many places, you see how he praised to being an Oyev Shalom and a Reidev Shalom, but there is a time for everything. There's an Eis Milchama ve'Eis Shalom. The Chassam Sofer said that this was the time to do battle, Ki Kein Chayv Kadosh Al Kol Bar Yisrael, and this is a holy obligation on every Jew, and Bifrat Ulamanhig B'Yeser. The Chassam Sofer, who is the Rav in the city of Pressburg, which today is called Bratislava, he started his yeshiva in Pressburg, which what Volozhin was to Lithuania and Poland, the Chassam Sofer's yeshiva was to Hungary. So the Chassam Sofer has grandson of the Chassam Sofer, in which he goes to the entire life and history of the Chassam Sofer. But there he writes, Ki daitei v'cheftzoi lihibadalei slahavdelei samitoch hakohol. It was the Chassam Sofer's intention to separate these people, these reformers, ke'adas korach va'adasei, that he looked at these people as adas korach, and therefore he felt the chayv kodesh to protect the rest of Yiddishkeit from this adas korach. So that, rabbi say, is enough of an excuse for me to speak about this in parshas korach. Now, what we're going to concentrate tonight, rabbi say, on is a very long tshuva the Chassam Sofer wrote to his father-in-law. The Chassam Sofer's father-in-law was Rabbi Kiva. And that's because when the Chassam Sofer got married for the first time to his first wife, Rabbi Kiva had a daughter. The Chassam Sofer's wife subsequently died, and Rabbi Kiva's daughter's husband died. So that Rabbi Kiva wrote to the Chassam Sofer, does he know of an appropriate shidduch for his daughter who was recently widowed? And someone came up with the brilliant idea that the Chassam Sofer in fact should be that person, and that's how the Chassam Sofer married as his second wife after his own wife died. He married the daughter of Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva, when the Chassam Sofer agreed to this shidduch, the Rabbi Akiva wrote back to the Chassam Sofer, and he says that he must apologize. She's a wonderful girl, but probably you want a bas Talmud Chacham for your daughter, for your wife, and I don't qualify. The Chassam Sofer wrote back and he says, yeah, but you also probably want Gemara says you shouldn't marry your daughter to Nahamoretz. So this is ironic that the two Gedolei Hador wrote back about each other in this fashion. Be that as it may, this tshuva was written, it's a very, very long tshuva, only part of which we're going to concentrate on tonight. But Rabbi Akiva wrote this tshuva, this is in Chelik Vav, the Likutim Siman Pei Daled. What prompted the Chassam Sofer to write this tshuva was a shaila that he got from the Rabbanim and the Bezdin of Hamburg. Hamburg is a city in Germany. And this, the Rabbanim of Hamburg, as you'll soon see, wrote the following shaila to the Chassam Sofer. Ubasher hasrora bekan hema anshe seichel umada amru lanu shenavi raya lidvorenu mechachme hadar hamefusamim. Meaning, the Rabbanim and Bezdin of Hamburg came out against a new shul that was being started in Hamburg. And they wanted to asser any Jew from entering the shul and for davening in this new shul, this new Reformed synagogue, not shul. Except they said that the government requires that they get some kind of heskim, some kind of approbation from the Gedolei Hador. So therefore, the Rabbanim of Hamburg wrote a shaila to the Chassam Sofer. If the Chassam Sofer will agree to their objections to the new suggestions that these Reform rabbis are trying to institute. Now, in the Lashon of the Sha'ela, which was written Rabbi Sai in Zayin Kislev Tov Kuf Ayin Tes, which is 1819. Now again, for some historical perspective, the first Reform rabbi at least what the historians call the first Reform rabbi, was a person named Yisrael Jacobson, who started a synagogue in Berlin in 1815. So by 1819 already, the movement had spread, and now they wanted to start a similar synagogue in Hamburg. So the Rabbanim of Hamburg wrote to the Chassam Sofer, and in their shaila they say what these new Reform rabbis are trying to institute. So, for instance, v'tiknu lahem beis hatiflo l'shabbos u'lamoedanim bilvad kfi hanasa b'Berlin mechadash. That in Berlin, in this synagogue in Berlin that was started by Jacobson in 1815, they only made a synagogue for Shabbos. They only come to shul on Shabbos. And then they went ahead and they printed their own siddur. So the Rabbanim of Hamburg write, how is the siddur different than our siddur? So, v'chach sidurai, mi birchas hashachar lo hitpisu rach birchas Elokai neshama. The only birchas hashachar that they printed was Elokai neshama. B'loshen ami ba'is yeshalahem. It was printed in whatever the language was. In German, I assume it was German, in the German language and the German script. They go from Elokai neshama to Baruch She'amar. B'loshen amin. Umedale kol psuki de Zimra. They skip all the psuki de Zimra. Rak haluyas Hashem and Hashamayim. Now, some people may think, that's what I do every morning. But at least your siddur has the rest of the psuki de Zimra. This siddur only had Elokai neshama, Baruch She'amar, Haluchas and Hashem and Hashamayim, and then Asher Yushar Benigan Ha'amim Al Kli Zemer Shekarin Orgil. And this would be accompanied by a musical instrument which was in the shul, which was called an orgel. Now, orgel, Rabbi Sai, is an organ. V'achar kach yishtabach. Then they go to yishtabach, no nishmas. V'omer kol yeducha arein ke'ercha. U'medalek kol shir ke'el odan akol amaisim. They skip that. Then they go Tismar Tzurenu, and Medaleg or Chadash al Tziyain Ta'ir. They skipped, in the Yetzer Or, they skipped or Chadash al Tziyain Ta'ir. Now, the reason for that is that the original Reform movement wanted to deny this whole concept of going back to Eretz Yisrael and rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. That is why, you may know this, that Reform synagogues were traditionally called temples. The reason they were called temples was because they were supposed to replace, Chas v'Shalom, the temple, the Beis HaMikdash in Eretz Yisrael. Because they didn't want to have anything to do with v'sechazenu v'neinu b'shuvcha l'tzion barachim. And therefore their synagogues were called temples. They were substitutes for the Beis HaMikdash. And it's only within the last, 20, 30, 40 years that Reform have gotten back on the Eretz Yisrael bandwagon. But the real Reformers had nothing to do with Zionism. Ha'choshen ki Berlin hi Yerushalayim, as Mayor Simcha writes. At any rate, they continue. They also gam bebirchas ava rabba medale v'kapsenu yachan me'arba kanfei sa'aretz. They take out that line. The same reason. Then they do Kriya Shema. They skip Emes v'Yatziv, and then they go ahead and they daven Shemini Esrei. After that, v'achakach mispal achazan Musaf. Then they daven Musaf, which again is a new version of the Musaf. Like K'minig Ashkenazim, v'lo K'minig Asfardim, v'ba Omer u'meish l'meish avdecha tzivisa l'kayim mitzvahs HaShabbos, yiratzam u'fanecha shetekabo barachim ma'areses v'aseinu b'makom tvidim u'musafen v'es musafei HaShabbos zeh k'mitzvahs v'tzenecha. That was their the Shabbos davening. And they write over here, near Ba'al, it's obvious, it's obvious that the exclusions and deletions of all references to Eretz Yisrael and the Geula HaAsida, they delete. They also go ahead and they say to the Sam Sefer, again, they write that in order for them to go ahead and to come out with their ban, they need the Heskeskim of a Gadol Ador. So they write, the synopsis of their shaila is, it comes down to three basic shailas. Number one, she'ein b'kayach b'shum ish l'shanas menusach hatfila ha'masur alonu. Number one, they're changing the nusach hatfila, and no one has the right to do that. Number two, derech klal lesser la'nosh l'spal rak b'loshen kodesh. We want to forbid anybody for davening in any other language other than Lashon Kodesh Hebrew. And lesser lenagin al ha'orgel b'Shabbos Kodesh afilu al yidei nachri. And number three, we want to come out against playing the organ in shul on Shabbos. Now, this rabbi is such a eye-opening statement. When they played the organ in their synagogue on Shabbos, it was al yidei nachri. They had a guy playing it. Because chas v'shalom, you should play an organ on Shabbos. That's awesome. So what do you have to do? You have Amir al-Akum, the Shabbos guy. He plays the organ. They wouldn't dream of playing the organ by themselves on Shabbos. What are you, Machal Shabbos? Now, this Rabbi Isai is 1819. Okay? That's less than 200 years ago. Look what's happened in 200 years. In 200 years, look what's happened. Chil Shabbos, you have to have a Shabbos guy. I mean, this is what happens when you start tampering with the religion. Everything begins to unravel, and you're left with something that's a facsimile of what once was. You'll pardon the analogy, but We all know, for instance, this is a mashal ba'alma. Maybe it's not even right for me to say such a mashal. But we know, Rabbi, what defines baseball? 3 strikes and you're out. 4 balls. Foul ball doesn't count as a strike after the second strike. There's certain rules to baseball. Now, what happens if they would decide not 3 strikes, 4 strikes? What if they did decide that if you hit 4 foul balls, you're out? What if rather than have 9 players, they would have 10 players? There'd be a short center. Or what if they would decide, that ball hits, if it hits the wall on a ball on a fly or 1 hop, it's also an out. At a certain point, it ceases to become baseball. It's no longer baseball. It's another sport, but it's not baseball. At a certain point, this is what happened. They started out having a goy play the organ on Shabbos, lest there be chil Shabbos. Now look what's happened today. Look what's happened today. That not only are non-Jews allowed to be members, non-Jewish spouses are allowed to be member, but a non-Jewish spouse can be the president of the synagogue. I mean, she could play the organ. What? So this is what the Chassam Sofer was dealing with. So the Rabbanim of Hamburg quickly point out, and they say, we know full well that the Mishnah says in Masechta Saita that davening can be said in any language. So then what are they going ahead and they're making a takana that you have to daven b'lashon kodesh? Mikol makom l'chachile l'shanes b'minig kamenenu mikametomim u'vefrat shekol kavanosam l'hidamais loha'amim leilech b'numusim v'day l'hakima. So we know you can daven in a different language, but that's not their kavanah over here. Their kavanah is not an art school sitter where a person doesn't know lashon kodesh and therefore he goes ahead and davens in English or whatever language. Their kavanah was, which was the raison d'etre of the Reform movement, was Niyeh Kechol Hagoyim Beis Yisrael. They wanted to be like the non-Jews. This has been going on since the time of Yirmiyah Hanavi. So that's why they went ahead. They wanted to make this stand that all davening has to be b'lashon kodesh. This was the shaila that they wrote to the Chassam Sofer on the 7th of Kislev, 1819. So the Chassam Sofer responded to them, Aleph to Reish Chodesh Teves Tovkuf Ayin Tes, again 1819. It's printed in 2 places. It's printed in a sefer called Eila Divrei Abris, and that it's printed in a longer form in the Tshuvas of the Chassam Sofer in Chelik Vav Likutim Siman Pei Vav. So the Chassam Sofer goes prat by prat, case by case, issue by issue, to demonstrate how this is sholei al pi din v'sholei al pi halacha. This concept, the Chassam Sofer says that, for instance, they only want to daven once a week, not 3 times a day. He says davening 3 times a day goes back to the times of Daniel. Daniel lived between the 2, Churban Bayis Rishon and Churban Bayis Sheni. He quotes the pasuk in Daniel, Tlos Zimni b'yoma havebarach al berchayu masi yemaidi. He goes ahead and says that the Anshe Knesset Haggadah, that even in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the Kehanim used to daven 3 times a day, and that's when there was a Beis Hamikdash. And even in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, they were mispalel that the Melucha should come back, Malchus Beis David, because they were under, at that point it was under the Chashmonai. He goes ahead and continues and says, how can you change the nusach of the tefillah? The nusach of the tefillah was established by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, v'chachmei haTalmud. V'heicheim yechelun levatul l'shanes nusach, harei ein bezn yochel levatul divrei bezn chaveir alim ken gadol himenu b'chachma v'minyan. We have a long-standing klal that one bezdin is not allowed to abrogate the psak of a previous bezdin unless it's bigger than them b'chochma v'minyan, and they are not bigger than the anshe knesses hagdela shahayu b'neim neviim. But one of the most interesting facets that I found in the Chassam Sefer, and this to me was startling. He says, "Gam ashereinu shaviseinu misakni hatfila letiknu b'klei shir." He says, "How come taka we don't have musical instruments in shul? Afal gav shemitanu yotza ashir hazeh ba'avedis beis hamikdash." Even though in the Beis Hamikdash there was klei shir. So how come in shuls? What happened? In the Beis Hamikdash we did have musical instruments, and shuls we don't. Zochtach Sam Sefer Shmami no lehavanichlu mishum mitam she'imiyim shechor Beis Hamikdash ein simcha lefanav. Because in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, so we were living normal lives, and we could enjoy ourselves fully. But once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, having musical instruments in shul is too much simcha. Some Sefer writes and he says, so you want to have musical instruments to misameh chasen v'kala, that's one thing. But to go ahead and to have in shuls, that's why it was stopped. Because in the Beis Hamikdash you could have full simcha, but not after the Churban Habayis. And that, wasn't that an issue also? No, musical instrument you may fix it in ancient Hamikdash. Yeah, but that's in terms of getting around how they played it. But he's asking the basic question: what happened in the Beis Hamikdash? You could use musical instruments, and today not. So that's his contention. But then he goes ahead and he says something that's really fantastic. He says, even if you accept, or for what do they say, okay, we have to have musical instruments. But what's up is the organ? What's up is the organ? So the Chassam Sefer says that Amamish, a fascinating thing. He says, David HaMelech talks about halu be'inim v'ugov. David HaMelech talks about one of his musical instruments was the ugav, was the organ. Ugav is an organ, and yet in the Beis Hamikdash, among the klei shir, which the Rambam talks about in Hilchos Klei Hamikdash, even the Beis Hamikdash, they never used an organ. Why not? Frechtach Sam Sefer Elatam Aboy. So the Chassam Sefer says a mishunadik thing. V'ulai mibnei shahashem meguneh ugav Hashem agavayim v'shirei agavim shoznus. Says the Chassam Sefer, you know what's wrong with an organ? Because the name of the organ is ugav. Now in Lashon Kodesh, there's a part of the human body that's called agavim, agavayim. That is the posterior of people. Says the Chassam Sefer, that's why they never played an ugav in the Beis Hamikdash. Because it's a David HaMelech wants to play it in the privacy of his own home, gesundheit, but not the Beis Hamikdash. Then he says a fantastic taz. Rabbi said, just to hear this one taz in the Tzustal is kedai the whole shir. That we say every day in korbanos in parshas hakteres. V'haloi mei raglayim yofin la. Ein sheim machnisim mei raglayim b'migdash b'nei hakovid. So everybody thinks mei raglayim is urine. So haloi mei raglayim yofin la. They should have used mei raglayim, but b'nei hakovid. The Taz says there was a stream, a river, and the name of the river was Mei Raglayim. And truth be told, they wanted to use the water from that stream. Elashe machnisin Mei Raglayim b'migdash mipnei hakovid. They didn't want to use it because it has a bad name. It has Mei Raglayim, and everybody refers to Mei Raglayim as urine. That's why in the Mikdash, even though they had klei zemer, but they never had the ukav. David HaMelech had the ukav, but not in the Beis HaMikdash. Zoktach Sam Sefer, beyond all of this, beyond the fact that we don't have instruments in a shul because we want to be maitim simcha, beyond the fact that we're not going to use an organ because it has a shem meguna, but Zoktach Sam Sefer, V'hayesher nir lani astaiti yishahaya sham chek chok u'oivdei kechavu mazoles hakadmonim lahachnis klei zeh davke beveis avedosam kasher gam ata minig aveseim biyadeim. The objection to the organ is the fact that this was, again, something that the Goyim adopted in their worship, and this was what was behind the Reform movement, Nia Kagoyim Beis Yisrael. That's why what's up is an organ. And there are only two places that they play organs: in churches and in ballparks. It's only two places. So he says, this is what was behind this. They don't have play. It's not. We don't have an orchestra, a symphony that has an organ. And that's why, says the Chassam Sefer, it was never used in the Beis Hamikdash. V'ayin Pirish Rashi betuval kayin taifes kinar v'ugov zok Rashi lavayde zara v'imkein havi kinar v'ugov k'may mizbeach o matzeva. Just like loisakim l'cha matzeva, because this is what the goyim adopted, so Mamela became chak ha'akmum. And then the Chassam Sefer says, and this business of having a goy play the organ on Shabbos, again, not a chas v'shalom a Jew. So they had a lumdus, Rabbi say. They didn't stop. They had a lumdus. What was the lumdus? It's a Ramah. It's Ramon Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah writes, Yei shaymim demutra loimer le'ena Yehudi lahalik l'ner l'suda Shabbos mishum desfir le demutra amir la'akum afilu b'malacha gemur b'makam mitzvah. The Ramah brings a Yei shaymim that it's mutter to ask a guy to turn on a candle, light a candle, or turn on a light to eat the Suda Shabbos b'makam ner. Why? Because it's amir la'akum b'makam mitzvah. Right? Shalpize nogu rabim lahokal bedavar letzavis lenehudi lahalik neirit letzarech suda b'fad sudas mechasan etc. Vein meichem biyadam. So, what's the lumdus? The lumdus is amir la'akum b'makam mitzvah. It's mutter to go ahead and have the guy play the organ. Some say, number one, what's the makam mitzvah? You invent a mitzvah, and then you go and say, oh, it's mutter mishum makam mitzvah. But moreover, the Chassam Sefer writes that the Ramah himself says, v'yesh lach lahachmir b'makam shein tzera gadol t'haroiv ha'paiskim cholken al sfarazu. See, this is an old trick. You go ahead and you take one shita, even though the Ramah himself goes ahead and denies and says that Roy Paiskim don't hold like this, and therefore you shouldn't be seimech on this, and the only time you can be seimech on this, the Ramah himself writes, Elo b'makam tzayra gadol. But they ignore that. They only read the first two lines of the Ramah. They don't read the end of the Ramah. So this is some Sefer's point. It's a stiru minei ubei. Some Sefer, for instance, points out to them and says, they had musaf on Shabbos. Now, why did they have musaf on Shabbos? Now, why is musaf called musaf? Musaf is the additional tefillah. It's musaf on what? Korban Tamid. Oh, every day you brought a Korban Tamid. On Shabbos you had a Korban Musaf in addition to the Korban Tamid. Oh, well, you have a Korban Tamid every day, so that what's up is you don't want to daven every day. So what kind of business is this? You go ahead and you have a Korban Musaf, because it's Musaf al the Tamid. Tamid means every single day. So how come we only daven once a week in a shul? The Chassam Sofer goes weiter and he says that the Rambam writes mefurish. I mean, this is a synopsis of the point by point by point of how the Chassam Sofer rips this to shreds. I mean, the truth of the matter is, there was a rabbi. The Chassam Sofer never referred to him as a rabbi. He never referred to him as Rav. His name was Aaron Hariner, if that's the way you pronounce it correctly. And he was a quote, a rabbi in a town called Arad, which I think was in Hungary. And he wrote a sefer called Noigat Tzedek, an entire sefer, in which he went ahead and wrote of all of these heterim and these shinuyim, etc., etc. The Chassam Sofer went through the sefer page by page, going ahead and destroying every single one of this Aaron Hariner's arguments, point by point, like this business about only davening once a week. The Rambam writes, "V'lo yispal yochid bisman sheyachol yispal lematzibur, lo ylam yashkim adam v'yar lebeis hakneses, shein tfilos shal nishmas adam ela bebeis hakneses." It's a Gemara Masechta Brachos. It's halach and Shulchan Aruch. So all of a sudden you come and you say, you only have to go to shul once a week on Shabbos? This is why you understand another thing about the Chassam Sofer. I did a word search, and it's not really an accurate word search because the Chassam Sofer used it many times in its proper context. But through many tshuvas in the Chassam Sofer, you have margal b'pumei. It was my constant expression to say, Chodosh Osir min haTorah b'chol makom. That Chodosh is Osir. Chodosh is Osir. Now, some people, 100 years later, 200 years later, look back at that with disdain. Sofer rejected anything that was new. But you have to understand the context of where the Chassam Sofer was coming from. Chassam Sofer was fighting a battle. He saw people were being they're sucked into this. So therefore, the Chassam Sofer, every time there was an issue of changing something, even though something's only a minig, the Chassam Sofer said, loy with an aleph. Because Chodesh also min haTorah b'chol makom. For instance, in Chassam Sofer Chelik Parachayim, Chelik Aleph Siman Chav Ches. Al das beis hakneses yishana shesosu anshe hakol kodesh v'yarchivu binyan chadasha l'roimim beis Elokeinu. A shul. They modernized the shul. Not that modernized it. They renovated the shul. They made it bigger. V'reitzim lahamid habima shekeret b'ter b'seif beis hakneses. Sobuch la'oren hakodesh. V'loi be'emsa shahoisa mikadmas dana. Rather than having the bima be'emsa, they had the bima up next to the Oren Kodesh. Now they did a quote, Ba'omrim shahaya noi v'harvocha yesa bebeis hakneses mishatamid be'emsa. Now, bima be'emsa is, as in terms of seats, is a big chisaron. Look at the bima be'emsa over here. Look how many seats it takes up. So you go ahead. You have the bima anyway. You can't see, nobody sits on the bima except the president and the rav, right? So put the bima up here. Put the play lane up here. Now, ironically, Rabbi Isai, none of us have ever been in a church, but you ever seen a church? The altar is up in the front. So again, this whole concept of Ni'ich Beis Yisrael. So they put the bima up here. So Chassam Sofer went mamish very stark against this. Why? Because Chodosh Osir min haTorah. Because again, this is the very slippery slope. That when you start down the slippery slope, you don't know where you're going to end up. And therefore, this was a refrain in the psukim of the Chassam Sofer, Chodosh Osir min haTorah b'chol makom. Because he was fighting a battle. And that is why, another thing, that Hungarian Kehilas, B'derech Klal, do not have chuppahs in a Beis HaKnesses. By Sfardim it's no problem. By Yekis it's no problem. But by by Chassidim and Hungarians and Jews, you can't have a chuppah in a shul. You know why? Same thing. Because where did Goyim get married? Get married in a church. So Mela, I want to get married in a shul. This is again the same issue. So in this Sefer Rabbi say, the Chut HaMeshulish, which is a biography of the Chassam Sefer, Kiveger, and the Ksav Sefer, it was written by a grandson. He writes, Al Kol Minig Yisrael Afilu Hakal Shebekalim Haya Eiker Hariv V'Loiniach B'Shum Oifen La'avirai. That when it came to a Minig Yisrael, not a din, but a minig, the Chassam Sefer would go ahead and with the greatest kifas and obstinance that you can't change Minig Yisrael. And he used to write, he says that a person who makes a fun of Minhag Yisrael, which we don't know the reason for, a person that wants to do away with Minhag Yisrael, you have to go check. There's something wrong with such a person. And his that's he writes, V'rogel hoya l'shaynai hakadosh hakadosh osir min hater b'chol makom ki hoya saynei chadashas me'aylam. And he writes in a footnote in the Sefer that in the Chassam Sefer shul, they always, as in the minig in many shuls, they used to put flowers in the shul for Shavuos. And over the Chassam Sefer's seat, apparently they had a whole chuppah of flowers. And one time the Chassam Sefer came in on Erev Shavuos, and he saw that they didn't put up the flowers over his seat like the minig was. And he looked and said, the shabbos, for some reason, decided, we don't have to have it this year. I mean, maybe the sisterhood didn't pay for the flowers or whatever it was. So Chassam Sefer had a tremendous hakpada on the shabbos. Now what is it? The Rav has to have flowers over his head? That was the minig. And when you start jumping with minhagim, you don't know where it's going to end. And this is the milchama that the Chassam Sefer fought, and to a very large extent successfully in Hungary. In Germany, he wasn't as successful. And 30-40 years later, Rabbi Shamshon Fall Hirsch, in the middle of the 1800s, he took up the battle against the reform in Germany. And that's where it started. It started in Germany. But the Chassam Sefer, built a fire line. He didn't want to let it happen in Pressburg and Czechoslovakia and in Hungary, and to a large part he was successful. So, again, you always have to understand the historical context of where a person's coming from. He was involved in a fight to the death, and he wasn't going to let it happen. And that's what, as we began, for those of you who came late and says, what on earth does this have to do with parshas korach? So his Einachel writes, Ki daite v'cheftzei lahavdil oisa mitoich hakol. It was his passion to keep these people from entering into the regular Charedish Yidden ka'adas korach va'adasai, because he looked at these people as adas korach va'adasai, and therefore he waged a battle in order that they should not destroy the foundations of Yadus. I'm tempted to start the Chumash part of this year with the famous first sentence of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. And this was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And it was, one can say, as a preface to this vort, it was the best of women, it was the worst of women. It was the best of wives, it was the worst of wives. The Gemara and several midrashim, the Gemara Masechta Sanhedrin, contrast the two wives, Eishes Korach and Eishes Ishtei Shalom ben Peles. For instance, the Medrash Haggadah begins, as does the Gemara in Sanhedrin. V'hainu dichsiv chochmais nashim bonsa beisa ze ishtei shalom Shlomo HaMelech, the famous pasuk, Chachmas Nashim Bansa Beisa, the wisdom of women builds the house. This is referring to the wife of Ein ben Peles. Piveles biyada taharsena, and the foolish woman destroys her house with Zu Ishta shel korach. What happened? So there's different midrashim. They're all basically saying the same thing in different ways, different contexts, etc. But the Medrash says that Korach came home from the inauguration of the Levium. How would the Levium, how did they, in that process in which the Levium became the Ovdei Beis Hamikdash, they had to be shaved from head to toe. And Moshe Rabbeinu had to make a tnufa. He had to lift up each of the Levium. So for instance, the Medrash says that B'shah Shamar Kadosh Baruch Hu Kakas Halavim Mitoch B'nei Yisrael V'tiharto Yisrael Yitarto Osam V'choisasel Laham L'Taram V'usar Kol B'saram Miyad Asakin L'Korach. So Korach comes home shaven from head to toe. So Korach's wife goes ahead and asks him, "What happened to you?" You know, sometimes I get a haircut and the barber goes a little too, my wife asked, "What happened to you?" So Shtolzich 4, Korach comes home, there's absolutely nothing left. There's not a hair on his head, his face, and his whole body. So his wife asks him, "What happens to you?" So Moshe says, Moshe Rabbeinu, he did this to us. His kolach are called Yisrael v'loy makir they saw him v'loy mi asalacha. Kach amal have Moshe v'loy ele natluni biyadi v'ragli u'neini feisi. Not only did he shave us, but he picked us each up, and he did tenufa with us. V'omer li harei hatohar v'hevias Aaron ochi v'kashtei kekala. But Aaron, he went ahead and he took him and he dressed him up mamish like a beautiful kala. So Zok the Medrash, that Korach comes into his wife and she says, "What happened to you?" So Zok the Medrash, Omar le ki gedi. Oh, so he said, "Well, what are you, like a sheep? That you go ahead and he shaves you like a sheep?" So he says, "What do you mean? He did this also to his own sons." To Amrullah, my Dorish, Maisha, Amrullah v'heinif Aranas halavim tenufa. So he picked us all up. So he said, "What? Are you crazy? You let him pick you up like an animal?" Amrullah l'banullah avialochi. Su Amrullah, my Dorish. What did he tell you? Amrullah v'asulam tzitzis. He told us the parshas of tzitzis. Amrullah, Bais Leda in Guderi Hu de Ka'ovid Boilin Gudei Allah. He's making like sonas of you. He's making chayzik of you, shaving you, lifting you up, and then he says this ridiculous thing about tzitzis. Kasi glima de kula tchelis. So I'll show you how ridiculous it is. Go ahead and take a beged that's all of tchelis, and go ask Moshe Rabbeinu, ve'ei molei hai nami boi tzitzis. So he said, have a beged shakulei tchelis. Go to Moshe Rabbeinu, ask him a shaila, does this also need tzitzis? Vo molei ein. So Moshe Rabbeinu said yes. So look how ridiculous this is. You have a whole beged and one psil of tchelis batters it, and here a beged shakulei tchelis. This is what motivated Korach to start up with Moshe Rabbeinu. His wife told him, "You're a fool. He's treating you like a fool. He's making you look like a fool. And you're taking this sitting down." What does Korach do? He starts up with Moshe Rabbeinu. This is what one woman did to her husband. Chochmas Nashim Bonsa Beisa. On the other hand, the Gemara says, who's that? That's referring to Ishtay Shel Ein ben Peles. So the Gemara says, Omarav Ein ben Peles. This is the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Ein ben Peles, Ishtay Hitzilosai. His wife saved him. Omerle, my naf l'chamina. My rabbi anas tamido. My rabbi anas tamida. What are you going to get out of this thing? So Moshe Rabbeinu is going to be the Rebbe, you're going to be a Talmud. Korach is going to be the Rebbe, you're going to be a Talmud. What are you getting out of this? You're not going to be the Reish. So what are you getting? So Omar Law, my Avid, Havoy Be'esav, Yishtabali B'Hadayu. So you're right. But it's too late. What can I do? I swore I'm going to go with them. So she said, Armolei, Tuv Dano Matsun Alach. Don't worry. I'll save you. So what'd she do? Ashkise Chamra Varvise Vagnese Gavoy. She went there and she got him drunk. So he was sleeping in the bed. Oisev Abova Vesasve Lamazye. She sat at the door and she took off her sheitel. So they come to get Ein Ben Peles. So they see his wife sitting there on the doorstep without her hair covered. As soon as they saw his wife with her hair uncovered, they had to run the other way, because you can't look at a woman's hair when it's uncovered. In the meantime, they all got swallowed up. So what the Gemara means to contrast over here is the korach of a woman, the korach of a wife. How a wife can goad on a person to start up, which was the downfall of korach, who pikeh choya, he was minaisei ha'orain, but his wife goaded him on, don't be an idiot, don't be a fool. Look what happened to him. Ishtei shaloim ben peles hitzilosai. That's the Gemara, those are the Midrashim. So I saw an interesting ha'ara. A very interesting ha'ara. And there's two different ha'aras. Ha'ara number one is, these were people that were willing to start up with Moshe Rabbeinu. Chazal say, Kol ha'chelek al rabbi k'chelek al hashchina. So, are these fruma people or not fruma people? Are they erlich yidin or not erlich yidin? They're starting up with the Nuvasi Shal Moshe Rabbeinu. Yet these same people that are willing to make a machlekes with Moshe Rabbeinu, to be chelek al hashchina, as soon as they see a woman with her hair uncovered, they run the other way. Now that's incongruous. I mean, you think that these people are kalim. You think that people aren't shemim mitzvah. No. They see a woman with her hair uncovered, that's our red line. We're not going to cross that line. The irony that they're willing to go ahead and to start up with Moshe Rabbeinu, but to go ahead and to see a woman with her hair uncovered, chas v'shalom. That's one ha'ara. The second ha'ara is anoshim keilu kedoshim. These are holy Jews. When they see a woman with her hair uncovered, chas v'shalom. Mikol makayim heim mesugalim lehikanis lamachlekes deked Moshe Rabbeinu. How can a person be so frum, so religious, so zohir, so kaddish, and make a machlekes? The truth of the matter is, Rabbi Isai, is we see this all the time. A person can be frum and the whole 9 yards, but he doesn't stop to make a machlekes in shul, to make a machlekes with the rov, to make a machlekes in the community. This the person calls himself frum, erlich. This goes back to times of korach. People that will not look at a woman whose hair is uncovered, but they'll make a machlekes. Machlekes is also a lav. And I heard a chaplain say this story over. That he went ahead, there was a Jew who was sitting in prison for not the best of reasons. So he's a chaplain. He bought him a lulav and esrog for sukkahs. So the guy told the chaplain, I makbid on pitim. Didn't want the lulav, didn't want the esser because he's makbid on a pitim. And yet he's in jail for what? So this, it's incongruous. A person can be so holy, so kaddish. He doesn't want to look at a woman with her hair uncovered. And yet to start a machlekes. Priorities. It's all a matter of priorities. The other horror I want to say is, as we all know, the Mishnah says in Masechta Ovis that machlekes shehish l'shem shamayim is the machlekes hil v'shamay. Machlekes she'en l'shem shamayim is the machlekes korach v'hadasai. There's something that we, since the times of korach, have not learned, and that is to have disagreements without being disagreeable. Which means you can have profound differences with people, and you can hold that they're terribly wrong and misguided. But that doesn't have to lead to personal animosity. It doesn't have to lead to lashon hara and all the things that go along with machlekes. We still haven't learned that. We still haven't learned that lesson. You know, Rav Volba once said in a shmuz that in Slobodka there were two yeshivas. There was the yeshiva that Reb Baruch Ber founded, which called Knesset Beis Yitzchak. Reb Baruch Ber was of the opinion, which was an old machlekes, that they didn't learn Musar in Reb Baruch Ber's yeshiva. There were two types of yeshivas, at least in Lithuania. The ones that learned Musar, ones that didn't learn Musar. Reb Baruch Ber, who was a tzaddik Yisayid Olam, but he held that the person will improve his midas by learning Torah, no Musar. The Alter from Slobodka broke off from his yeshiva and started the Slobodka yeshiva. Knesset Beis Yisrael. It was a Musar yeshiva. So here in the same city, I think one was in Kovna, one was in Slobodka, but mamish the same neighborhood. And one was a Musar yeshiva, one was a break-off yeshiva, and yet Reb Baruch Ber took as a son-in-law a Talmud from the Slobodka yeshiva. Even though philosophically they were on other sides of the spectrum. There's a machlekes in Shita. Should you learn Musar? Should you not learn Musar? But that didn't prevent them from being the best of friends. To marry each other. So he brings an interesting maisa, a beautiful story, that it's well known that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zeir Tzadik Levracha, at the hesped of his wife, normally the minig is that at a levaya people ask mechila from the nifter. So Rav Shlomo Zalman said he doesn't have to ask mechila from his wife because he didn't ever do anything for which he has to ask mechila for. He didn't ask mechila, made that statement. So sometime thereafter, Rav Shlomo Zalman met a Talmud. The Talmud had just gotten married. So Rav Shlomo Zalman asked the Talmud, "How's it going?" He says, "It's going great." "It's going great?" He says, "Yeah. My wife and I never argue." So somebody says, "Is your wife sick?" Maybe she's not feeling well. She says, "No, my wife is fine. We never argue." So Shlomo Zalman said, two people live together in the same house. It's inevitable that there are going to be arguments. What do you mean you never argue? So the Talmud says to Shlomo Zalman, he says, "But Rebbe, you yourself said that you didn't have to ask mechila from your wife. There was nothing to ask mechila for. So you see that you can have a house with no arguments. Shlomo Zalman said, that doesn't mean that there were no arguments, that there were no disagreements. It means that there were disagreements. We had our issues, but there's nothing that I have to ask mechila for, because we came to an understanding. Shalom doesn't mean that everybody sees things the same and looks at things the same and never have disagreements. Shalom is the ability with people who can have disagreements, have issues, have different ways of looking at things, and nevertheless come to Shalom. And as we said, Ois Shalom b'mraima, the Rebbeinu Shalom makes Shalom between Eish and Mayim. Eish and Mayim are the opposites, and yet they can coexist. So Shlomo Zalman told him, we had our differences of opinion, but at the end of the day, there's nothing for me to ask mechila for, because shalom does not mean the lack of difference of opinion. Shalom means people that may have differences of opinion, may even have strong differences of opinion, but the ability to coexist, that's true shalom.
This year was presented by Rav Yissocher Frand Shlita.